Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming along this afternoon on our very last day. Wow, our last day at sea. So thank you for giving up your time this afternoon. What I wanted to do before I start, I just wanted to say thank you to our amazing technical staff here in the Princess Theatre. And they kind of make everything run seamlessly behind the scenes. So thank you to the technical people. Thank you. Thank you also to our incredibly talented and amazing cruise director and our entertainment director, Cole and Lauren, and also to Angie, who work so hard and they make us laugh so much, and they are so talented that, yeah, I just want to say thank you to them from me as well. And mainly, thank you to all of you for coming along. Thank you for coming to these enrichment sessions and just for being a wonderful group of people and for making it a really successful trip up north to Alaska and back. So thank you very much from me to all of you. That's just wonderful for coming along. I wanted to finish off our cruise by just having a look back at some of the places we've been and some of the things that we've seen. So it's a naturalist's guide, mainly looking at the wildlife and the natural history of the places that we've been. So what have we seen? Wilderness, a place where birds and beasts remain uncooked. I like that, as Oscar Wilde. And we've seen wilderness. That is the main reason for coming up here to Alaska. We've been to Alaska, the great land. The name Alaska comes from the Aleut word, from the Aleutian people, which means the great one. So that's where we've been. And we have seen incredible glaciated landscapes. So the whole of the area was created by glaciers during the last ice age. This huge ice sheet that covered this whole area carved through the mountains and left these deep, deep fjords where the glaciers were. And then the sea came in and flooded the areas where the ice was to create these very deep water fjords, which means it's perfect for us to cruise around this area of Alaska. They're very deep water, we can get right up to the edge because the sides pretty much go down straight. So this whole area that we've been through was made during the last ice age. And we had a little look back at the history. We looked back at Captain Cook and Captain Vancouver, who sailed in these waters in the late 1700s. They were looking for a passage across the top of the world to the Atlantic, and we know from their logbooks, from their records, that most of the fjords that we have sailed in were full of ice. So back in the late 1700s, the glaciers were right down to the mouths of these fjords, and that was what we call the Little Ice Age, from about 1500s to 1700s, where these glaciers surged down to the edge of the fjord. So this area that we visited has been covered by ice, and the glacier have retreated, then they've come back again, and they've carved out the rocks. So it's quite spectacular scenery. And this is one of these long fjords down these U-shaped valleys. And you can see when the ice retreats, the forest comes back, and then the wildlife comes back. So this is happening all the time up here. And these forests take hundreds of years to reach their full potential along the edges of these fjords. And we've seen that these fjords are ice-free. So all summer they're ice-free. They're free of sea ice in the winter. They don't freeze over. They're protected by the mountains along the coast. So they're seawater. It's part of the Atlantic Ocean that comes in, but they're protected by the mountains. So they're a very unique area. And we sailed around the inside passages. That's what it's called, the inside passage. And it is a myriad of waterways, blind-ended fjords. There's huge areas of virgin rainforest and these deep fjords. And the whole area has what we would call a perfect working ecology. Everything is working together. It hasn't really been affected by the people whose homeland it is. They didn't have very much effect on the ecosystem, so everything has been left pretty much perfect. And in the Wilderness Act in 1965, that was established by the US government in 1965, they called this area a place untrammeled by man. And they spent a long time trying to come up with a phrase that summed up this amazing part of the world. And they said it was untrammeled by man. And we come and we visit and then we go away again. And that is what we do here. It's this wilderness area. And we've seen glaciers. This is the Mendenhall Glacier by Juneau. And we've seen these vast landscapes, just huge mountainous vistas. And I think that when you've been somewhere like this and you've seen these huge landscapes, I think somehow that stays in your heart. Somehow it stays with you. It's kind of there when you go back home. It changes you slightly once you've seen all this and you remember these places. The photographs don't really do it justice. It's what you remember, the feeling of being there, of that space and freedom. I think probably half of us are going to come back and live here. I think we've all got plans to do that. I think maybe especially after COVID and lockdowns and all the things we've been through for the last 3 years, the idea of living somewhere where there's that space and the freedom is probably really, really attractive. So I think we should all do that. Come back here and live. That's what I reckon. And this was a place where John Muir spent a lot of time. He was certainly attracted to this part of the world. He lived here for long periods of time. He lived up in the mountains, in the forests, and he had a great gift of being able to use words to paint pictures of where he'd been. So he was able to communicate the feeling of being in these places back to the people back home. And in particular, he was able to influence the government, and he was able to influence President Roosevelt and establish national parks. So John Muir was able to put pressure on the government and to protect these areas. And the American national park system is incredible, it's extraordinary. It is huge areas of national park that are left untouched, that are there for us to enjoy. It's a really wonderful thing to have done. It's quite unique in the rest of the world. The national parks spread around the world, but the national parks here in America really are the jewel in the crown. And this was where we started our little journey around the wilderness areas of this part of Alaska. We headed up Frederick Sound and up towards Juneau. And here we are approaching Juneau along Frederick Sound. This isn't Frederick, by the way. This isn't him. This was just a random person looking at Frederick Sound. But it was a beautiful morning. I don't know if you remember that if you were out sort of early-ish that first morning before Juneau, it was absolutely perfect. And the time of year that we're visiting is perfect. The scenery is incredible. The snow is coming down to the shoreline. You have this kind of crispness in the air, this like late spring, early summer feel that you have at this time of year where anything's possible. It's a brand new start of the season. So that was a wonderful morning along Frederick Sound, and didn't know it at the time, but this was the best time to see the whales and the porpoises and some of that marine life. You may have seen just a puff, just a blow, in the distance. You may have seen a fin, or maybe just a little humpback of a whale. Again, they wouldn't be as close as this. These are taken with, you know, zoom lenses on cameras. So when you're just looking at them, they're further away. But just a blow, just a little rounded humpback of a whale, or a tail, a fluke. Or you may have seen the fluke or the tail of the humpback whale. But there were humpbacks around that channel as we came into Juneau. And there were also a couple of sightings of killer whales. So with the killer whales, you wouldn't have seen the tail, mainly the fin. You don't usually see the tail or the fluke. It's mainly the fin that you would notice from the killer whales. But it's difficult to judge scale, as we've said. And these are the Dall's porpoise. They're not that big. I just realised that looks enormous. But they're a lot smaller than the killer whales. But they're deceptive because they have that very black and white colour. They're fairly active. They would be sort of porpoising, moving, you know, you'd see splashes in the water. So you may possibly have seen the Dall's porpoise or the killer whale. If you saw something that had black and white, hard to judge the size, but it would have been one of those two. Both equally as special to see.